Hey there, everybody. This is Cody Pondsmith with Artelsorian Games. I am the lead designer on The Witcher TRPG, the line lead. So I figured I would set up a seminar here just to talk about Witcher and sort of where we're going and what we're planning. So I will be taking questions. I will be answering those sort of towards the end of the seminar. I'm going to try to leave some time for that specifically to address questions. So if you have questions, please put them in the questions about Witcher shared sheet that everyone should have links to. Um, so I guess in the meantime, I'll just jump right into it. So we have been lucky enough to recently release a Witcher's Journal, which is our bestiary and also a lore supplement for the Witcher TRPG. Um, I have been just absolutely amazed to see the response to a Witcher's Journal. It was always a bit of a there are some bits in there that were a bit of a gamble, opening up sort of a different sort of timeline and putting so much on the introduction of Erland as a character. And I've been just really amazed to see the response. Really, it makes me very happy. Um, the project was sort of a long time in the works, and we spent a lot of time between me, Lisa, Jay Kovach, our art director, and a few other people in the office, just making sure that it came out as solid as possible. We've been really happy to see the response. Um, we are at the moment working on, as many people know, Book of Tales, which is our next supplement for the Witcher TRPG, which is going to be an adventure supplement. What we wanted to do was we wanted to get basically, core book, GM screen, monsters so that you can fight some monsters, and then some adventures so you could get like some story seeds or something to really like sink your teeth into and run besides the adventure at the back of the core book. So Book of Tales is a 6 adventure collection which has basically 6 individual adventures. Each of them will run for like 2 sessions for most groups, one for some if you run for like particularly long sessions. Like my groups, we usually run for like 6 to 8 hours, and we could probably do that in one session. But I know that a lot of people only have time to run for like maybe 3 to 5 or something of the like. Um, and each one is designed to bring sort of something interesting and new, whether that's showing you a new place or an exciting way of looking at a place or sort of a new form of adventure. It's a really exciting one because we have this, much as we had in A Witcher's Journal, we have this sort of internal fiction to the book, which is that A Book of Tales is basically literally a book of stories written down by Dandelion, which is, of course, 100% truth. Everything in it happened 100% as it was stated. Um, and it kind of travels across the continent with these 6 adventures going from Kovir and Povis in the far north all the way down into Ebbing and Toussaint, going through basically a series of adventures. I've been working on it with James Hutt, who's been our sort of primary design on it, as well as Linda, who may better be known as Druddercup on Twitch, and Sarah Thompson, both excellent writers who we brought on to work on this project for 2 of the adventures, who have been just really nailing it, just 24/7. James has requested that I read the in character introduction to Book of Tales because we had a lot of fun. He had a lot of fun setting it up. So they have this introduction to this sort of collection of stories, which reads, "Dear reader, in my travels as a wandering poet, I've experienced much more than any man's fair share of excitement. Indeed, like beauty, it cannot hide from me. Often I am called upon to recount adventures which do not appear in my popular ballads to satisfy an audience's craving for novel amusement. In the same spirit in which I always oblige them, I have decided to write down some of these tales so they might be reach further than my lungs will allow. You may consider this book of tales an addendum to the adversities of loving and the time of the moon. These stories span the entire continent from the icy mountains of Kobir and Povis to as far south into Nilfgaard as Ebbing. They concern thieves, assassins in the night, monsters of frightening proportions, deadly duels in the hands of fair maidens. You might expect me here to quell any fear that these dangers did ever walk these lands, to claim them as mere fantasy, to soothe you. I will do no such thing. All that I write here has transpired. On my honor as a bard, I pledge it so. A very nice piece of introductory writing that was a lot of fun to set up. So, Book of Tales, just giving basic, like a basic layout. It is 6 tales. The first one is called Under the Ice, which takes place in the mountains, the Dragon Mountains, sort of in the span of Kobir and Povis. It's a straightforward monster hunt that's designed to be a great first session for larger campaigns. Any parties will feel at home, but sorcerers will particularly find it exciting as you get to deal with a sort of newly forming Northern Lodge of Sorceresses, which is trying to sort of not exactly pick up where the Lodge of Sorceresses left off, but you know, a high society sorceress group in Kobir and Povis. The next story is in the Alderwood, a seemingly straightforward monster hunt in Kedwin, which quickly goes off the rails and can end in tragedy. I can't say a lot about it, but it involves this sort of mysterious forest in northern Kedwin, where people have been going missing, and the players are sent to investigate, maybe not finding exactly what they were expecting. The third story, Stone Cold Lies, takes place as the players are traveling to Mahakam for the beloved Ale Festival. Upon reaching Mahakam and entering Mount Carbon, the players are called upon to help investigate a mysterious murder that has taken place just before the festival and must be solved before the festival can begin. It's a really great sort of, this is our greatest opportunity to really see inside Mahakam and kind of deal with really solidly dwarven society. So I've been very excited about this one. The next adventure is called A Murder in Maribor, where to destroy a death cult menacing Nilfgaardian occupied Maribor, the party will have to fight through a monster-riddled sewer. This is a really like combat-heavy adventure in which the players will have to sort of work on solving and investigating this murder of a prominent mage in the city, as well as sort of delving into this very like, you know, monster-riddled sewer with a bunch of sort of twists and turns that you can go down. James spent a lot of time working on the sort of like overall setup and map for this. So it's this very interesting sort of almost dungeon crawl-like experience, kind of interspersed with an interesting sort of intrigue-based investigation. The second to last adventure is Enter the Fighting Pits, in which the players, seduced by the prospect of winning a glorious prize, are drawn to the Claremont Arena in Ebbing, which has been more or less rebuilt, and they are host to a eccentric group of wealthy Nilfgaardians who bet on the lives and deaths of the sort of Colosseum, sort of, you know, gladiatorial fighters in this arena. This one is, once again, this combination of combat and intrigue in which your players will be taking part in sort of more like mini game type gameplay as they're going through like battles with other gladiators. We have one entire section devoted to the pastime of Ebbing and especially the region aardvark fighting. And at the same time intermingling with this sort of series of almost like high court interactions with these masked Nilfgaardian figures who obviously sort of have their own agendas and are betting on, like we said, your life and death in the arena. The last adventure takes us sort of north from Claremont to Toussaint, and specifically the area around Fox Hollow, where the players are paid handsomely to protect a handsome knight in his quest to rescue a princess from a tower in a situation which, as James said, rather quickly turns hairy. This adventure is a little bit of everything. It is generally considered to be sort of the last adventure in the timeline, as you can play all of these adventures linked one to the other. So you would start in Under the Ice, and at the end of Under the Ice, there are, of course, plot hooks that would lead your players to Into the Alderwood. And then from there are more hooks that would lead to Stone Cold Lies as your party sort of travels down through the continent, going from Cobir and Povis down to Toussaint and the surrounding area. What we really wanted to get was a book that could be played either as individual adventures for, just getting into the game. Maybe you need a starting point. You want to, get your game started off with a different adventure than the adventure in the core book, or maybe you don't want to write a starting adventure. So you can give everybody a really good concept for how a Witcher adventure should run. You could do this, or you could do 6 to like 12 or even longer if your players want to do in between stuff or want to carry out things, longer. There are a lot of options for investigations to run longer, or you interact with different characters in the games. If you just want to run Book of Tales as sort of a campaign running from north to south, going from one interesting event to the next, there's that option. The especially cool part about Book of Tales is that we will have, as well as all of the adventures, we will have a bunch of new player content. We specifically have added some new weapons. We have added some new spells which can be taught to you by the sorceresses that you encounter in Under the Ice. And this will be the book where we bring in the more unusual races that we hadn't put in the core book just because they are much rarer. There will be stats for playing gnomes as well as for playing Vran and Werebubs. And you will interact with Vran, Werebubs, and gnomes in Stone Cold Lies as sort of part of the larger sort of murder mystery. It was a lot of fun to go over and kind of compile everything to make those races really work within the foundation of Witcher. And I'm very excited to see people's characters made as these 3 new or newly introduced races. So this is Book of Tales. It is currently late in development. We are preparing to go to editing. I cannot give a direct date when it's going to be out, but we are aiming for basically end of the year. And that will probably be somewhere around 160 pages of adventures and some new player content, just to kind of give everybody some fun stuff to play with. I'm just taking a moment to look at questions here. I will hold on questions until the end, so I'll forge on ahead here, but please feel free to write anything in you have questions about. The next big thing that I get to talk about is something I've actually been excited to talk about for a while. I have always had a sort of plan of the Witcher line, as it were. I've found that in many cases, licensed TRPGs tend to get 1 or 2 supplements, and then they tend to fade away. And I've always found that to be a shame. So I set out a whole list of supplements that I would love to do for Witcher. And the next one is the next in that line, as it were. We have done the core book. We got to do a GM screen with some player options and new professions. We got to do our Book of Beasts. We got to do our Book of Adventures, which will be coming out soon. So the next book that I am excited to get to work on is Tome of Chaos, or A Tome of Chaos. which is going to be a rather large supplement all about magic, different types of magic, and sort of about being a magic user, from priests to mages to even like pellers and things like that. So I can't say a lot about it because we are still sort of in, we're still, shall we say, in some of the outlining phases, but currently we are looking at A Tome of Chaos will be A Tome of Chaos will be about sort of in the same range as Witch's Journal, somewhere around probably. All of this is subject to change. I should say this right now. Somewhere around 160 pages. And we are looking at basically bringing you, much as we did with Witch's Journal, this collection of notes on magic by a effectively defected Nilfgaardian sorcerer or sorceress who is now transcribing these notes, sort of bringing knowledge north from Gwyson Hall and the sort of Nilfgaardian practice of magic. I'm really excited to actually talk about Gwyson Hall and like flesh out what it's like being a Nilfgaardian mage, as well as some other stuff. We're currently working with the concept of, much like we did for Witchers, doing a mage specific life path, as many mages, just like Witchers, have a very different raising than the average person. You know, this would be your opportunity to roll through what your life was like in Banard or Gwyson Hall or Aretuza, or perhaps training under a specific mage or something of the like. An opportunity to get the way we're currently looking at it, a less sort of high risk, high reward, brutal life path. You know, the Witcher life path was designed to model their life, which is a very high risk, high reward, very like you could lose a limb type of life. The mage life path, as we're looking at it, is going to try to model the life of a mage, which is much more about making connections and, in many cases, making enemies, gathering resources and things that you can call on, sort of building this political web, which we know that mages do all the way from, you know, the north down to Gwyson Hall in the south with the Nilfgaardians. There are a bunch of other like cool stuff that I've generally planned on dipping into, which we're still kind of working out how they would go. Obviously, we're going to have more spells, more invocations, more curses and hexes, and more rituals. I can't speak to exactly how many of each we're going to have, but we are going to have a good deal of new magic for you to learn, and in the type of like curses for you to use as a GM on your players, or as plot hooks or something of the like. One of the ones that I have obviously in mind is I'm excited to write stats for things like the Nithing that we see in Witcher 3 and stuff like that. And Lisa and me and James already have begun to and are continuing to spend hours and hours going over the books and the video games to compile every like reference of magic we can possibly find, so that we can compile this all into a book that we really want to compile just as much information about living as a mage or a priest in many cases, or using magic. We're also planning to kind of touch on religion a bit more than we did previously, talking about sort of not just the bare basics of the religions, but talking about sort of how they interact with each other in some spaces, talking maybe a bit more about some of their sort of legends and things like that, and maybe even delving into some of the like less established religions, like the worshippers of Dagon and stuff like that, some of the ones that are more vaguely mentioned. A lot of this just kind of comes down to how much we can fit in this book, and that's the exciting part about it for me. Once again, everything is subject to change. The other things I want to talk about was the optional rules. We had a few optional rules in the Witcher TRPG core book, most notably monsters via the books, in which we had the optional rule of not all monsters are susceptible to silver, so you have to, pick and choose your meteorite or silver as you see the monster, as you know about it, as it is in the books. The optional rules of adrenaline. We are currently working with some optional magic rules, including the one we still have not entirely worked out. We're still working out, which is basically we know that of the people who have access to magic, actual mages are a very small number. It is primarily people who, like Corrine Tilly, for instance, have one magical talent. They can do one thing with magic, and that's about as much as they can do. So we are currently kind of thinking about how we would do rules for that in game. How you would basically have a character who might be might be a merchant or something, but they have one magical talent that allows them to, they have a very small amount of telekinesis, or they have, the ability to light small fires, or like little sort of, you have one little magical perk thing. Of course, the danger in that is always making sure that that stays balanced, but that's going to be one of the challenges we're working on. The other one, which I have been obsessed with for a really long time, which, obviously didn't go into the core book because it was a little more complicated than we really wanted to go into in the core book, was I've always been fascinated in the way magic works, and especially how magic is described, I believe Blood of Elves by Yennefer, as having almost like personalities. Earth magic is harder to draw on, but it's very powerful. Water magic is easy to draw on and fairly easy to control, which is why the novice sorcerers tend to use water magic. Fire magic is easy to draw on, but hard to stop drawing on. So I've been working out how I could relate effectively, how we would make that personality of magic kind of carry across rules wise as an optional rule. One of those that I personally love the idea of, but we're still kind of figuring out whether that would be, functional, whether that would be an interesting thing to put in, that sort of thing. We are the other thing, the last kind of thing I can really talk about here is, because these are all things that we're fairly sure are going to be in the book. We've worked out how they're going to basically work. The last beast to wrestle with is we want to go into all of the forbidden magic. We want to go into how you do necromancy, how you perform Goetia, that sort of thing. We actually are really specifically looking at Goetia for this because it has the fascinating point of being sort of the only form of magic, save for curses, that anyone can do. As long as you have the willingness and the desire and the rituals, you can contact a devil or a demon no matter pretty much who you are. You just may not necessarily like what you get. And in that, we're kind of figuring out how Goetia would work in the system and how you would go about preparing those rituals and performing those rituals and what you get. We have very definitely seen that while demons can be vague in the case of spoilers, the case of like the caretaker and the cat and dog in Hearts of Stone, we've also seen that demons like Bargeist and Heims and things like that are very specific. They are, as everything else in The Witcher, they are a very categorized demon. I summon a Heim specifically, or I summon a Bargeist specifically. So we are looking at actually sort of building that out so that you can have slightly more vague Goetia for, use as plot points in games, and also some probably fully statted out demons that you can contact, so that you can probably use them as a plot point, or if you're a player, you could unleash hell by deciding to try and summon a demon for some reason, or make a pact with a demon. We've seen people try to do it in the past, and I guess you could do it, though I think it would be interesting to see how that kind of factors into the plot line of people's larger games. Obviously, this is all very secretive stuff, so it's hopefully not going to come in and like you're running a nice Witcher game where everybody's, traveling with their traveling merchant friend, and then one of your players decides to summon a devil and ruins the whole game by becoming a hellspawn. That sort of thing. It's the interesting balance of figuring out how to make these things work while not derailing everything or unbalancing everything. So that is kind of as much as I can really talk about there. Like I said, everything's in flux, and there's also there's a lot that may or may not happen depending on whether we can find good designs for it. I don't want to put anything into this book that doesn't work or isn't designed well. That would be a real shame, as it were. So that is a Tome of Chaos. I cannot speculate almost at all about when it's going to be out. We are in the outlining phase. We are going into what's going to be in the book, and we are looking at primary design. So it's not going to be soon, but we are going to make it worth every day you have to wait for it. It's also going to be very interesting because we're going to have a lot of opportunities to get a lot of beautiful new art sourced with a lot of the artists that we worked on with The Witcher's Journal and are continuing to work on with A Book of Tales. And we are currently working out a similar series of like flash fiction pieces, much like we did with Erland in A Witcher's Journal. So you'll have some interesting stories to kind of give you surrounding in-world lore and sort of examples of things as you go through the chapters, kind of going through A Tome of Chaos. At least that's currently the plan. It's 1:37. I think, let's see, what are our questions here? I've got to make sure I have time for these. I want to make sure everybody's questions get answered. Give me 1 second. All right. I think I can say one more thing, which is extremely vague. This is the most vague. It is absolutely not in any finalized form, and I cannot say anything that will be. Don't hold any of this to my word, as it were. There is one more project that we are currently kind of considering working on. One project that we are starting to kind of get people lined up for as we are working on Tome of Chaos and finishing up A Book of Tales. We by Tome of Chaos, we will have a lot of the stuff that I really wanted to get. I wanted to get, as I said, a core rulebook. I wanted to get a GM screen because the system really benefits from having a GM screen. I wanted to get a monster book so you had some monsters to fight. I wanted to get a magic book so that you would have some monsters. No monsters. You have some magic, and you'd have some of the deeper lore of the sort of more complex forms of magic. The one that I'm currently discussing with the rest of the line is another project that I've kind of had in mind for a little bit. Our social media manager, Jay Gray, also threw it on this, and we all kind of brainstormed. It's not going to be in development for a while, and we're still not exactly sure everything it's going to contain, but we have been working on the concept of doing a larger guide. Basically a book that is currently our working title is Rodolph's Guide to the Continent, which would basically follow Rodolph Cosmer as he travels from one side of the continent to the other, and would have chapters on different regions and what you can expect to find in them, different cultures, and what you might expect to encounter as you sort of move through the cultures. Information on sort of like very specific regionality things, maybe even some unique items and factions and things that you would encounter as you went through these areas of the continent. Sort of, we wanted to get a book that would be if you've got something that'll tell you about the magic, and you've got something to tell you about the monsters, and you've got something to run the game, we wanted something that will really tell you a lot about the world. And we want every page in every chapter of this book to be a gold mine for a GM trying to plan a campaign through the world, but also for everybody who is interested in the specific lore of different regions. Especially, we of course have to work with CD, so I can't say anything specific. But we're excited to talk about a lot of the regions in Nilfgaard that did not get a lot of play. We get to talk about what what it's like to live in Metna more deeply than 3 paragraphs in the world section of the core book and things like that. So that one's the far off dream, as it were. The project way down the road that I'm excited to work on after Book of Tales and Tome of Chaos. With that said, and already having said too much, I will say one last time, everything is subject to change. Please don't kill me. And I'll shift over to questions here. Before I jump in here, I have gotten a note from my lovely host. Yes, Tyromancy is in the list of magic that we are planning to bring to Tome of Chaos. I'm figuring out exactly how to make it work, but we are planning. I wanted, ever since I saw Tyromancy, to have cheese divination in the game somewhere. There are a lot of I'm still trying to figure out exactly. I'm figuring that like you have different material components that are like maybe different types of cheese or something. But yes, I am a big fan of Tyromancy. Let's see. Kat, a new GM to The Witcher, asks, are you planning on making miniatures and dice specifically of The Witcher TRPG? It'd be so cool to see some Witcher miniature monsters in sessions. First of all, welcome. Thank you. Thank you for GMing our game. We're in a sort of weird situation in many cases with Witcher TRPG because we work very tightly with CDPR. I have for quite a long time wanted to get miniatures and dice made for the Witcher TRPG, but I can't really make any promises as of the moment. It has been a really hectic time between us maintaining the Witcher line, working on Cyberpunk, and CDPR, of course, working on 2077. All I can really say to that at the moment is I would love to. And as we have been working with, Monster Fight Club on our Cyberpunk minis, we know some people who might be able to do that sort of thing, but there is some legal stuff that has to happen, and we have to make we have to sort of work it out with CD how we want to do that. So I can't say yes, but I'm not necessarily going to say it's not going to happen. Once again, most of this is largely up to our business manager and CDPR. So, I must absolve myself of at least to that much of that. Sword3274 asks, do you have plans for releasing setting material, Kingdoms, and Empire source books? As I have said, I have plans in the far future. Like I said, with Rodolph's Guide to the Continent, if we go ahead with it as it is kind of like pie in the sky right now, this would have a lot of information on basically every kingdom set up, with even hopefully some information sort of like how things have changed over time, maybe some information about what it was like during the Golden Age, several hundred years ago, and that sort of thing. It's a big ask because it will require a lot of new material to be created, which means there will have to be a lot of sort of cross-pollination and work between us and CDPR together to make sure that everything fits into the canon appropriately. But there's a kind of plan for that down the line. The Sorceress asks, should we expect to see Vrans and perhaps other creatures as playable characters? Vrans will be in Book of Tales, as will be Werebubs. Perhaps other creatures becomes a little more difficult. As of yet, we have generally split between sapient monsters and sapient races. Um, I realize somewhere deep in my heart that we have technically given people some capability to play higher vampires and true dragons, but it makes me wake up in the night screaming. So I will leave that to whatever GM decides to let their players play one of those monstrosities. Um, we've like considered other sapient races, but the weird part is that many of the sapient races in Witcher are inherently terrifying. We sat down for a while and talked about Dopplers, for instance, but the Doppler exists in a special place in the Witcher universe, as it's, you know, as anybody who's read the books knows, it's not only able to take your shape, but it can like become a quantum copy of you and take your memories and all of your like thought processes and stuff. So it is extreme. Technically, it is extremely powerful. And there's also stuff like trolls and in some cases ogres and things like that we've kind of thought of, but we've never really put a lot of thought into playing those types of creatures. After Vran and Weirbubs, we kind of run out of a lot of like the sapient races that are not considered monsters by the rest of the world. The other problem is like Vran are obviously going to be hated and feared, and Weirbubs are at best going to be tolerated. But if you wanted to play some of these more monstrous creatures, it would also just be, it would in some places make it difficult for the party to function. You know, there are a lot of situations where you walking into a town could become extremely dangerous or difficult in general, even if you're playing like a troll or something of the like, because you are more seen as a monster than you are a sapient race. So that's what I would say for that. I can't say exactly. I'm not going to say exactly what the Vran's racial features are going to be. They will be hated and feared. This is a question from Jared. I can say that it's very weird to work on the Vran because they tend to change a lot throughout the canon. You know, we are authorized to use our canon exists within the Witcher books and the Witcher video games. We do not use the old comics from Poland. We are allowed to use the new comics from Dark Horse. We do not use the old TV show from Poland, and we technically do not have access to the new TV show because it's, you know, contracts and whatnot. But the Vran are in a very strange place because they start out as, you know, sort of big bug-eyed lizard men who, you know, are very much sort of classic, almost like science fiction, like pulp action lizard men, and then kind of segue into being the like more sleek, like tailed lizard men that they are in the Witcher video games. So we actually have this interesting task of trying to mesh those two concepts together as best as possible to get something that was kind of made sense with both of those concepts a fair amount. They do not, in the TRPG, they will not necessarily have every ability that they have in every form of the fiction, just because they've been depicted in a lot of different ways and had a lot of different abilities. But we have done our best to try and boil down the abilities they have to make them feel like they are Vran, as it were. Wandering DM asks, would a Scoia'tael focused book be something you'd be interested in publishing in the future? I feel kind of bad. Oh, there he is. Okay. The answer to that question is that is something I would be very interested in publishing. It is not something we currently have plans for. I have always wanted to do, not always, I have for a long time wanted to do a sort of combination, sort of lore guide slash like adventure book with the Scoia'tael, where basically all of the players would play members of a Scoia'tael commando, basically trying to, you know, just make a difference and kind of survive in a terrain in which they are hated by basically everyone everywhere. And it would be a very sort of like, you have your commando and you're all, together, you're all non-humans who, have found their way to the Scoia'tael for some reason. And it's basically an adventure of you trying to kind of stay alive and try to fight for the values that you theoretically joined the Scoia'tael for. And that would have more information about like what the different commandos of the Scoia'tael are like in different regions and stuff like that. It's kind of in that category of like a passion project that I'd love to do, but probably won't get done for quite some while if it does get done. But I can say that if we wind up doing Rodolph's Guide to the Continent the way I'd like to do it, there will be some info on the Scoia'tael in there. Rodolph don't love the Scoia'tael, but he will definitely talk about them. Jared asks, will hops be mentioned in the new Tome of Chaos? It is an optional rule that I could put in. So for those of you watching who are confused, my assumption is that Jared is referring, of course, to the fact that in one of the short stories in Last Wish, Geralt offhandedly says that it is difficult to cast magic in the presence of hops and hemp when he is fighting the satyr or the Sylvan. I've talked about this definitely I've talked about this on interviews before. This was part of a huge list of questions that we sent to CDPR when we were working on the core book. And we sent them like 5 questions that were like, is this real? First, it's got to be real because it's in the books, right? And if a mage gets drunk on hopped beer, can they not cast magic as well? And if I cover myself in hops and hemp, am I resistant to magic? And if I throw a hop bomb that explodes into hops and hemp, can I effectively have the same effect as a Dimeridium bomb? And there were a few of those that were just like, what is the fallout of hops and hemp making it more difficult to cast magic? I personally believe it was probably something Sapkowski threw out in a sort of statement about, it was probably a plot point of a reason Geralt couldn't just use magic, but it has its own problems if you take it as canon. It probably will not be in Tome of Chaos other than as perhaps an amusing sidebar, but I would say that you could probably just say that when in an area of enough hops and hemp at GM's discretion, a mage has, I don't know, half their normal vigor threshold. And then set your game in Eddern before the fall, where they've got plenty of fields of hops and hemp, and just watch all your mages complain. Tyler Boyce asks, what's your best advice for homebrewing the monster of the day, or at least creating a unique adventure with an already established monster? What I would say to that is that every monster in Witcher is, in its own way, it does something unique, or it is in a unique place. I would say that basically, if you're doing a monster of the day type game, I would always, you sit down with whatever monster you want to use. Pick a monster that you think will be fun, first off. Like, there are plenty of reasons to have almost any monster. Pick a monster you think it might be fun, and then look at what that monster does and where it lives. And kind of tailor the adventure to what it does or where it lives. There are a lot of good examples of this, like Bulvor in the new Witcher's Journal are these like sort of despotic like warlords that live in caverns and rule rot fiends. That's a great plot line. If you can find some reason for your players to go into the underground and have to fight an army of rot fiends led by this, big, rotund, horrifically monstrous Bulvor that spits acid, That's a cool option. And because Bulvor are technically sapient, you can even kind of get some weird, like, it's almost like an underground kingdom interacting with humans on the surface or whatever. There are a lot of opportunities like griffins, for instance. Griffins are highly territorial creatures that are effectively the apex predator of their territory. So there's a lot of options for you to be like, okay, you're traveling and you find a ruined caravan that was obviously attacked by something. And you can find that basically there is this, you know, group of people, perhaps it's even important people or somebody that your characters are looking for, who are hiding out because they are now deep in the territory of a griffin that knows they're there. And they have to find some way to escape. And maybe that doesn't come down to fighting the griffin. Maybe that comes down to finding a way to like sneak out of the griffin's territory before it notices you or something of the like. One of the things we did in Witch's Journal is at the beginning of every monster type, we put a sidebar that said basically like, here are some possible encounters. It's stuff like the sidebar for hybrids, for instance, is hybrids are among the most versatile monsters in monster types in The Witcher. They can be found almost anywhere and have many motives. After finding a treasure or raiding a ship, the characters could wind up being harassed by harpies who want the shiny treasure. Things only become more complicated when their ship runs up on a sandbar and they're trapped with the harpies. It could be a shadowy gang of assassins hires the characters to find a manticore and extract vials of its deadly Bohun Upas venom, but they have to find a way to milk the manticore of its venom without being killed. The characters could wind up tracking a trail of unfaithful lovers and enthralled nobles to find that a number of succubus, or perhaps an incubus, have created a secret brothel in a major city and are draining the locals of their life force and fluids. If you want to have a highly intrigue-focused game, the characters could encounter a succubus who has infiltrated a noble court. We tried to give a lot of examples for how you could use the monster's nature to put it into an adventure and really weave an interesting, plot line around that monster. So like I said, my best advice would basically be look at what the monster does and especially where it lives, and try to find a way to build an adventure that would make your players interact with where it lives or what it does. It's especially fun with sapient monsters because they are, they have their own goals besides eat and survive. Rodolph, hey! Rodolph asks, is there any chance of more depth details on the Witcher schools from future supplements? So this is a possible one. A lot of what we did in Witcher's Journal was also to kind of test out the waters on the concept of the Golden Age, a time when Witchers were not extinct, where they were at least somewhat respected, and where the schools were still functioning. I can't really say anything specific as far as things we have on the horizon, but having seen the very positive reaction to the Golden Age and how well people are taking to that, I definitely have plans in the future to do more in-depth discussions of all of the Witcher schools. And if I can, even touch on like the Manticore school and some of the information that we hadn't been able to talk about. But this is just the things I want to do. This is not technically on our schedule. So if I get my way, we will talk a lot more about the Golden Age and we will talk a lot more about the Witcher schools. So I think I'm about out of time and I'm also out of questions. So thank you everybody for coming. I hope you had a great time. I hope you're as excited for the next products down the line in the Witcher line as I am, because I'm going to have a hell of a fun time putting them together. That being said, thank you for giving me your time. Thank you for coming, everybody. Have a great con and stay healthy.